Hello everyone, it's Matt here and welcome to OcTRAINber Part 1. OcTRAINber this year, I'm actually only doing 2 videos on, this one being the start of work and then a second one being the end of work. So this is Part 1 and Part 1's going to go over some of the research and some of the rules and a few other bits and pieces. So first, the rules of the OcTRAINber contest this year are slightly different to other years in regards of what the entry is. Now this year it's all about dioramas and there's appropriate gauges of diorama size based on how many base plates or the equivalent of base plates it takes up. So obviously you've got a small, which I think is up to 3, a large, which is 3 to 6, and then giant, which is anything above 6 base plates in overall size. Now obviously that size is measured as an appropriation of studs, so obviously if you've got the equivalent of 1 by 6 base plates, that's still large, the same as 2 by 3 base plates is large. So in terms of overall shape, providing it matches the footprint, it's still in that category. Now, unlike last year's, which was all about a physical build, this year there are digital entries, which is great for me because I don't have the money at the moment to invest in the parts to actually get the entry built, but I also don't have the space to actually store it at the moment because the space is taken up by train models, mills modules and other bits and pieces, so I don't actually have the room for it. So the rules themselves are reasonably loose enough, but I feel that an entry is worthwhile. Motorization, they've said if you can integrate some form of motorization aspect, that's great, but it has to fit the narrative of the diorama. So for example, there was a story about the ice loading station that loaded ice into one of the reefers that was posted to Eurobricks. Great motorization, and it fits within the theme of the diorama, so if there's ice being loaded into a reefer, but it has to relate to the story, and that's the primary thing they're concerned about. So moving on to that, I had a really good long think about it. I didn't actually do anything for OcTRAINber throughout September because it's a bit weird. These are unlike previous years. This was actually announced in September. Possibly so that people could have a bit more of a lead in, possibly so that you could start acquiring parts earlier. So from my perspective, I was more of the thinking while I was doing other bits and pieces, such as building brick model railroad cars and doing a few tweaks and doing this and doing that. So my primary thing came down to, or my options really came down to about 4 different things. One would be a scene of a Trestle Bridge, which is going to be a fairly generic thing, but it is nominally attractive. It's something that's done quite a lot of model railways, but not done as much in Lego from my perspective, and it's something a bit more unusual on the British scene. The second one was to do with reefers, and I did mention that somebody did the motorised one already, and it's actually an icing platform or icing house, and that's the actual one I actually chose in the end for various reasons. The third option I thought of was doing some form of signal box or signal tower, and again that's been done reasonably well by other people. And the other thing is I did one for the Bricklink contest that was 2 years ago or 1 year ago, I can't remember. It was a while ago in my mind, so I don't really want to do another signal tower because I'm just rehashing what I've already done, and that's obviously not and that's actually one of the rules, is it can't be something you've done before. And the last thing I was thinking about was doing a factory or an RSI or a rail-served industry, as I'd call it, and that would be okay in my mind, but the trouble is that crosses over with the warehouse I'm already building, so I don't really want to do 2 giant buildings that do a similar purpose. Also, I could do something else, so I could do maybe a microscale iron ore tippler operation, so it'd be loading it into boats, or possibly something along those lines. But overall, I felt that the ice platform and house was the most valuable out of the 4 options I, sort of compressed all my choices to. And the other thing is that with me owning the Brick Model Railroad reefers, I kind of ties those into the layout. I'm eventually going to have time and money to build, and it also means it's something that if I do actually build it and finish it, is that I've actually got something to stick the reefers with. It gives me another industry to serve. Not an industry, but it's something to add to operations, and the eventual plan long term is to actually have a meat packing plant. So obviously you'd have livestock arrive, or livestock or poultry. I should add a disclaimer there. So livestock and poultry have got to arrive, and after they've been processed, you've then got to stick the meat or the carcasses or what have you into reefers, so they can then get transported and then sold in shops. So an icing platform actually fits into that quite well, because you've got to ice the reefers before they actually go to the meatpacking plant to get loaded. So although this is long term and a long way off, it is actually another step in the story of transporting perishable goods by rail, and that's an interesting thing, and it's not something I don't think that is modelled as common as it should be. So the icing platform or house I've gone for is something that's reasonably small. It's something you'd see on an average yard. It's not something giant. It's something that would serve enough railroad cars to actually serve its purpose, but not overly massive. Most ice platforms and houses I saw didn't have as great a capacity as one might imagine. So most of them, from what I looked at, had capacity, depending on which railroad you looked at, what size yard they served, generally between 2 to 4 cars, and obviously depends on how much there were. Sometimes that could be as much as 8, because bear in mind, although you're only doing 8 at a time, is that you're only loading ice, and ice is effectively shoving large blocks down the bunkers and then moving it onto the next reefer and then doing the same again. So although it seems like not a lot of space, in reality, because you're not doing a great deal, you're not really bothered about the fineness of the ice, you're just really bothered about getting the ice in there, getting it packed in as much as possible so you can actually keep the produce or product cool as possible, and then you're trying to move on to the next set of reefers that need icing, or possibly even getting rid of your current set of iced reefers to their industry to get loaded. So obviously that's the primary thing. So now we'll go over to some footage I recorded earlier, which was about the Lego Digital Designer model I'm currently working on. So after all those bits of researching what to do is over with, I've obviously got to come up with a design, and as usual I started sketching out stuff in Lego Digital Designer, and it actually started off with this corner piece here at the front, and you can kind of see the duplicate of it back here. Well, this is the primary bit. This is the bit where I sort of did all the analysis and technical wranglings, if you like, of the main sort of slapboard style of construction, or wood siding, depending on the technique, or whatever you call it. And this is the corner, and then this itself was actually broken down into several parts for various uses. So we've got a 4 wide bit of lapboard, we've got one of the pillars, which is just a single stud wide. We got a 2 stud wide corner pillar. We got some wall, which is 10 studs wide, and then 12 studs here. And then you got another few bits, 12 for adding onto various bits, although technically they're duplicated, so you can actually take those out. You got one of the bits with the door, and effectively from this corner and these parts, I actually built the rest of the ice house. So let's now have a look at the ice house itself. Now, obviously, this is by no means complete. It's still got to have the roof on. I've still got to finish the sides. The roof is the main bit because it was normally a peaked roof. So I've got to work out how to do the roof properly. I'm imagining I'm probably just going to cheap out with just some sloped bricks, largely because to build a proper roof would be very fragile at this scale. Largely because a roof to cover this would actually be rather fragile if you're also going to do a brick built roof, where it's a very parts intensive roof, because there's not going to be a lot of support. As it is, I'm going to have to build some brick supports on the inside, partly for the sides anyway, because the sides are only supported at the moment at the bottom, but also because to support the roof weight itself I'd need to build something inside just to support that itself. So that's another aspect that needs finishing off. Overall, the proportions I think are okay. It should possibly be a little wider, but I'm going to leave it as is for now. There's only one window in the entire building, which is this one here. I might add another one somewhere, I'm not entirely sure. Most pictures I see of ice houses only have one, possibly two, possibly three windows. They're normally clustered around entrances or around important areas. So for example, this window here might be important because this might be some form of office in the ice house. Very unlikely, I know, but it does make sense to have some form of admin sort of area to process paperwork inside the ice house. You've got your receiving door here, and now that some ice houses do seem to have one door at ground level for truck access, so possibly where trucks were loaded and unloaded with ice. Some of them seem to have another one at this top level, so you've actually got one at ground level, one at the top level, like platform level. So obviously that might be if they were bringing in trucks with ice, or they needed to get materials up to the platform height. They can obviously, there's normally some form of crane or something where they could hook out over the side and then pull whatever materials up. I've gone for a rather basic approach here with just a little wooden platform. This is actually using 1x4 tiles with a wood pattern on. I've done a mix because Lego Digital Design does actually have two sorts of styles of pattern, and the rest is just some general gravel detailing I've put on. Obviously this is not final. If I was going to actually build this, I'd probably change the base plate to a different colour for this bit, possibly a grey or something, so it actually makes a difference. But the trouble is that I don't think it does stick out underneath the platform here, so I'm a bit apprehensive about actually changing the colour of this one, but I might do later or when I build it. Remains to be seen. There's no interior in the ice house. I'm not actually going to put an interior in the ice house for the simple reason that you can actually see the insides, walls, and I don't actually believe it's actually going to benefit anyone to actually have an interior, even though it's an interesting building. It's effectively a storage location. It's going to have a load of ice in. It's not going to be particularly interesting as far as I'm concerned. The effect of an ice house is not so much the detail inside, it's the detail outside and how you integrate it with the railroad. So a detailed interior is not something I'd be interested in doing. Possibly doing little vignettes around the entranceways or doorways, possibly. I am doing in some flooring so that at least even if I have a door ajar, there is still some flooring underneath it, so it's not completely a case of open a door and there's no floor, as you would find in some video games, for example. There is actually going to be some form of flooring, even if it's only 3 or 4 studs beyond where the doors are. So at least there's a little bit of detailing there. And again, another reason why, if you ever have a look at these doors, there's actually 2 studs behind them, is because if you actually have a look at the door itself, you can't actually see behind the door because the door would actually open outwards, not inwards. I'm not sure whether that is how the prototype would be, but I'm treating it as they'd open outwards rather than inwards. Because obviously with an ice house you're trying to keep it as cool as possible, and inwards opening doors would possibly allow more air in rather than if they went outwards. That's my theory anyway. Certainly from the photos I've seen, they seem to be more about opening outwards rather than inwards. And another reason that these will open outwards is that they're actually recessed from the platform. It's not straight onto the platform. There is there is a stud gap there between the actual platform, and you would actually need both doors open normally. I've put two doors in because that's easier seen to the normal, and it also means I can copy them for the lower doors on the ground on what would be ground level, but it's remains to be seen. So this is the main bit of the ice house, as I was discussing. This is the ice platform. I have roughly matched the height compared to the brick model railroad reefers. Now, according to photographs I've seen, the ice platform itself is normally slightly higher than the roof of the reefers, so that the ice actually slides downhill on into the bunkers, or alternatively it's straight or almost straight, if not slightly downhill or downward sloped onto the walkway and then into the bunker on the opposite side. So that's why the platform looks so tall. This cross brace pattern, it doesn't look buildable in real life, but I have got a real life prototype built. It does strain the bricks slightly, but it does build. It doesn't look all that great in the digital model, obviously, because you've got a little bit of a split on certain stanchions, but on the real life test piece I've done, it does work. It just obviously would be a bit more trickier to build in real life. Now, obviously, the platform itself is actually I would like to say is separate to the main structure. The floorway does come out onto the structure. I'm aiming to separate that so that the actual structure is separate to the platform, so the platform's actually a removable piece. That remains to be seen, obviously, if this was a real life build. Now, the platform itself does actually have two plate high base it rests on, and the reason it's 2 plates high is because one plate is the bit that actually touches the pillars, and there's another plate underneath that actually anchors the plates together, so there's actually an offset to the plates just so that everything can be kept in neat and tidy fashion. There is also a bit of an issue as well with the current issue of the current design of the platform, is that it's actually an odd number of studs. Adding on another section of platform would add another equivalent of 5 studs, and that would equalise it out into an even spacing. So that again might be something to consider if this was a real life model. Is it's only get another 5 studs. It doesn't sound like a lot in real life. It wouldn't be a lot, but it is a extra 5 studs platform. It's a little bit extra space. I'm not necessarily sure whether it'd be needed or not, because this would have a capacity of a minimum of 2 reefers, possibly 2.5, depending on how you parked them. It does certainly can cope with at least 2, with possibly a gap between them. So it is designed to serve a minimum of 2 reefers. You could possibly, again, with that extension of another 5 studs, possibly fit in 3, if you're being optimistic and being very careful about how you actually loaded the ice and careful about how you actually operated the platform. But you can also argue the point that I can actually extend it out another 5 studs this way, another 5 studs the other end, to gain an extra 10 studs, and your platform certainly has a lot longer length and actually extends beyond the ice house. And that's actually one of the reasons why there is this slight gap between the ice house and the platform. That is a legitimate thing, is that a lot of ice houses were built with a slight gap between them and the platform, but also because at this end here, where the end actually integrates with the lap board, there is a slight issue. So this cross brace actually extends slightly too far. Now, it is a piece I think I have the ability to alter, down or up possibly. Certainly up. I'm trying to get it down, but I think it might be touching on something, so or it might be hitting another piece around here. So obviously this should be something that you'd need to adjust in real life to make sure it works properly. But again, as a digital model, I'm not too bothered. Also, there would be some sort of slight bracing at the back, like a handrail. There'd also be something at the ends, and the platform onto the rail car side itself, which is this side. Some of them have ramps, some of them are just open-sided. I'd probably leave mine open-sided. What I would possibly do is put some pillars up outside this doorway and possibly extend it to this doorway as well, and have a bit of a roof, so that at least the entrance and exit bit around where the ice and people would enter and leave is protected from rainwater, and is just a bit more protected from the elements, so that there's less chance of wind getting in, and that it's also a bit more protection for if there's any sunlight that would focus on this side, for example. It can't go directly in, it's got to hit the roof first. So again, it's a bit more weather protection for the ice house. Other than that, I don't really think there's a lot to deal with in terms of discussion about the ice platform itself. It is based... I was originally planning on having a platform in the middle here. So what would happen is the ice station would actually be closer to the rail lines. The doorways would actually be raised another couple of studs, a couple of bricks in height, I should say. And there'd actually be a downward slope over this rail line to an ice platform in the middle, and that would actually feed either side, which does seem to me to make more sense in that it will then have a greater capacity because you can now ice on two sides of the tracks. But from what I've seen of ice houses, they would have one, if they were going to do that, they'd have one platform here to serve this. So you've got this platform here to serve this line, and you'd have another platform in the middle to serve the next line. You wouldn't have one platform in the middle to serve both. It does seem a bit weird why that would be, but it is feasible. But if I wanted to, I could possibly change it so that it is an arm platform. The only issue I'd have, obviously, is because freight cars are 8 wide, I've spaced this out so there is a extra stud in effect for the detail, and then there's an extra stud wide almost extra space there for as a safety gap, for if you had any minifigures that were riding on the side of the car, there'd actually be a little gap for them to escape out of. So this is the ice platform as it is at the moment. There's obviously still a lot to do. There's still the roof to finish. There's still the sides to finish. I'm hoping just to tile off these ends and finish it off. So this would be the actual start of the roof height as it currently is now. There's only this end and this side to do, and can start on the roof, which is going to be another interesting thing in and of itself. But that's actually it for this OcTRAINber part 1. And when I've actually finished the model, there'll actually be a part 2. This is part 1. So I'm only going to do a 2-parter. This OcTRAINber, there's going to be the starter one, and there's going to be the end one when it's finished, and that's it. So that's it from me, and I'll see you in part 2 coming up, hopefully reasonably soon.